Oh. Hello. We have only a little bit more to go. And yeah, Janos is here, not all the team, but I think we can all congratulate the team who has put together a really good program, which means that the last part is also worthwhile. First listening, but hopefully engaging also in your questions and comments later on. We have, no, this is too early. We should have one slide before this. Okay, have we? Yes. We have Björn. Sounds Swedish, doesn't he, right? Yeah, but actually Björn should be with us live from West Coast, US. And if we can bring Björn on the screen. Hello, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Your slides are small, though. If you can we make those slides?
Yeah, so let me try to figure that out. My slides are small. Let me restart it and fix that. Make them a bit bigger. Let's see here. Is that better?
A bit. So we still see it's not full screen, so we see the address bar for your browser.
Okay. Let's see how that works. I'm not sure.
Well, I think we can, eventually it will work because our screen here is large.
Yeah.
So if that's...
Yeah, I think
if the audience agrees, okay. The audience says thumbs up. Oh, yeah. This is.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is perfect. So
okay.
Björn is the CEO of a company that develops a certain kind of technology that helps to build even better AI solutions. And how that is relevant to healthcare is something that I think Björn yourself are the best person to explain. So far we have been discussing specific examples, how AI is being used, then discussed also what it is between kind of open source models and then models that are, or solutions that are developed by vendors and then sell them as a product. And then in the end, I think it would be really good to hear that how to develop and what the engagement in terms of the language and technology and better understanding of how computers and models communicate with the health domain fits very well with that. So I leave you to introduce also your own kind of relationship to this topic, because I find this interesting, but perhaps once again, why you are here and why this intrigues you is as important as what you have been prepared for us. So, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I was invited by Lars Lindsköld and Janos, the organizer of the conference, to get involved, and I'm speaking to you from Marin County in the northern San Francisco Bay Area. I am not a healthcare professional. I have run companies working with healthcare organizations from a technology perspective, so I just want to say that I'm not a doctor. I'm a technologist and an entrepreneur. But I've been in technology 25 years, built and sold companies, actually the last one to a Helsinki-based company. And when I was speaking to Janos about the conference, the topic of AI and how it relates to healthcare came up, and we said that giving a high-level overview would be useful. And obviously, AI is touching every industry, and healthcare is not different in that way, but healthcare is more complex than a lot of industries. So the contact surface is perhaps a bit more difficult to achieve in some cases. So with that said, I'll share some perspectives on what AI is, what it's not, what it's good at, what it's not good at, and a view of what's on the horizon. And I thought we'd start this by just grounding in that, saying that healthcare is in the midst of one of the biggest transformations since antibiotics and imaging, and that AI is not just a tech wave, it's changing diagnostics, patient engagement, drug discovery, operations, workforce productivity, and much more. And I'll try to clarify some of the buzzwords and cut through hype, because there's an incredible amount of hype, and I think there's also some misunderstanding. And I think as a society, everyone's sort of getting up to speed all the time on what is the latest development. And I'm also going to show an emerging form of a practical hybrid form of AI that will be useful in terms of software development in particular. When you read the news about healthcare and AI, I should say, in more particular, it's hard to sometimes know, what's real. I put up just 2 articles from just a few days ago, where on the one hand, someone's saying from Google, well, AI is so good, you shouldn't even bother getting a degree. And then the other article right next to it said, well, AI is so bad, you shouldn't let it do anything. So which one is it? And sometimes, we gotten questions from investors as well, is it great or is it not great? And the answer is, of course, it's complicated and it's changing. And it's important to remember that the journalists who are writing about AI, they often don't fully understand what they're writing about. So that's important when you see an article. Take it with a lot of grain of salt. Now, there are some who really understand it, and it's important to for yourselves to suss out, which ones know what they're talking about. And that's a bit of a journey, and reading a lot of different articles. There's some really good podcast formats, deeper dives. Happy to share more about that later, but that's also a good source of information to build your own knowledge, because at the end of the day, what I think everyone should be doing is building their own mental model of what AI is and what it can't do, to gauge the veracity of all these articles. And keep in mind that multiple things can be true at the same time. So it's not just, it's all great, it's all bad, obviously, but it's good at some things, but, it needs help over here. And it's also obviously very quickly evolving. But at the end of the day, it's more a question of how to work with AI and not if to work with AI. So in terms of structuring the brief talk here, I thought I'd go through some very basic definitions. Some of you may know them. They may be news to some. Do a bit of assessment, what AI is good at, what it's not good at, and a vision of what's on the horizon. So with that, jumping in, there are many definitions of AI. So there's not, I would say, a dictionary one version of this, but broadly speaking, it refers to computer systems performing tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as pattern recognition, decision-making, prediction, etc. From the healthcare angle, that means decision-making, radiology scans and triage, chatbots, and predicting patient deterioration and things of that nature. And AI is really a spectrum, and not all AI is human-like. And there's been a lot of talk about anthropomorphizing AI, giving it a personality and talking to it like it's a person. And if you define AI as, an LLM, it's more than large language models. It is not obviously a person. It's just predicting what is the next word. So it's more of a prediction machine if we talk about LLMs. There's also a concept of AGI, artificial general intelligence, a system that can perform any intellectual task a human can do or better flexibly across domains. That is different from what we have today. We do not have AGI today, and there's a big debate on when and if we would even get that. But today's AI is not AGI, but it is specialized, it's capable, highly capable, not so reliable. So important distinction between capability and reliability. So for instance, a model that would predict heart failure risk would be one example of it. AGI could some way act more as a universal doctor's mind, but we're very, very far from that. And personally, I don't see it happening anytime soon, even though there's a lot of great capabilities from AI. So all that to say, there may be a bit of hype for now, especially when it comes to the transformer-based models, which are these LLMs. So the transformer-based models really came about 2017 through a white paper called Attention is All You Need from Google DeepBrain, which laid out the basic architecture of parallel processing of tokens as opposed to sequential. And from there, we got the large language models that have been so prevalent now. So these large language models are really scaling up that transformer model and training them on massive amounts of text that can generate, summarize, and reason. So that you can think of it as they have essentially read everything on the internet and looked at that as a pattern. So if you say A, they predict B comes next, and they don't really know anything in a human sense, but they predict what's the likely next word. So instances or examples in healthcare could help drafting patient letters, summarizing clinical notes, making complex research digestible. But at the end of the day, it is pattern matching. Here we'll talk a little bit about what the LLMs are good at and not, and what else there is, because AI is bigger than LLMs. Today, when people speak about AI, they often mean LLMs, but AI is a broader umbrella than just LLMs. It's just the most recent and most prevalent trend in AI today. So the strengths of these LLMs is that they have a lot of ability to synthesize information across domains. So they're very good and powerful communication tools. And they can also perform reasonably on medical board exam questions. So they're good at summarizing things and seeing patterns and inferring things. But when you ask them to get really precise, they often confabulate or hallucinate, as it's called. So that is one of the bigger weaknesses, that you have not the reliability that you need. There's also opacity. They're very much of a black box. Don't know what goes on inside of them. And lastly, they use up a lot of energy, really an enormous amount of energy. And they have biases from training data. There's a lack of determinism, so you have unpredictable outputs. So obviously need very careful validation in healthcare and the injection of humans and deterministic systems at the right junction point, so they're not blindly trusted. There are other models already out today within vision biology. So you have in radiology and dermatology imaging, there are biological models with protein folding, such as the DeepMind AlphaFold. There are decision models for optimizing hospital workflows, scheduling, etc. Each of them are specialized, and they've made real strides. In terms of looking ahead, which is one of the most fun parts, I think, where you can imagine things, and this is what we're building. We're doing more than imagining at Bigger, and launching later this year. I wanted to share briefly our high-level vision for new form of AI, where we combine things in a hybrid. So we don't believe that a single model solves everything. And there's a lot of groupthink of saying if we could just train the LLM a little bit better, it will eventually get good enough. But I think it's a case of trying to outrun your own shadow or chasing your own tail if you're only using an LLM, or a little bit of the saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So our view is that the future is hybrid. So we combine really three things. and we try to orchestrate them together and use them where they shine, essentially. So the human is definitely part of it, and the human should do everything that it's best suited for. Same thing with the LLM. It can do certain things well, but there are many things that it can't be trusted with or that it doesn't do fully well. And then we have also developed our own, and this is for software development. So we're really focusing on that domain and building reliable software systems that don't hallucinate or don't have bugs like code from LLMs. And that's a precise rule-based model that would take too long to explain in this short amount of time, but it does not hallucinate. It's a lot faster. It conforms to frameworks and architectures that you tell it to do, so it's much more predictable. And together they cover each other's weaknesses. So that's the point in our approach. Another way of looking at it is through a pictorial. So if you use an LLM over to the left only, if that's all you're using, it's easy to get a jumbled picture. But with a deterministic system, you get a more cogent system that hangs together. Going into a little bit of detail how it works, and this is extremely high level and very simplified. We have a number of inputs. Some of them come from LLMs and humans, and some of them are juxtaposed or put together or assembled by our DLM and humans. So those range from ideas, documentation, templates, UI, and then we have our DLM model that really consists of three main things, with a system model that has been built up, or you could call it an opinionated PRD, a template or a co-template essentially defining how things should be done, and a transpiler, which is an extremely sophisticated version of a mail merge, you could say. And then out comes deterministically generated code. It's not 100%, that's where you have the little blue briefcase there. There's still a last mile coding when there are exceptions or edge cases, but I'll just leave it at that for now for sake of brevity. So in closing, I think what I want to say is that the future isn't human or machine, but it's humans and machines with an S, because there'll be multiples along the hybrid concept. And combination of humans and machines might also mean a half automation with rapid model building. You could also think of what you dislike most in your work, and perhaps that's a good candidate for AI. And I would also, in closing, emphasize the importance of building your own working knowledge of AI by following the news. And over time, patterns will emerge. It's like almost getting a degree in AI by reading the news, if that makes sense. And just know that a lot of the articles are written for shock value or for getting clicks. But eventually, I think if you read enough of it, then you'll see which is which. And at Bigger, we're pioneering this balance by pursuing a hybrid intelligence instead. And that's our piece of the puzzle. And with that, I'm happy to take a question or two.
Thank you, Björn, for giving us assurance that computers alone are not yet to take over, and that there are careful people like yourself who actually try, not in a generic terms, but in a very practical and pragmatic way, to make humans work together with the computers. Are there any specific questions from the audience at this stage? I would ask, have you already had some specific use of either your technology, or you are aware of use cases of this vision, what you shared, where this probabilistic and deterministic really kind of software and technology development are being used in the healthcare context or for healthcare?
No, so as I mentioned earlier, we're going to market later this year. So those use cases are yet to be built. We have had beta pilots they've actually been with the U.S. Navy and Home Depot and startups, so not in healthcare yet. But I think the relevance for healthcare is that in the deterministic approach, you have this lack of hallucination, so you can have more confidence in the software that's being built. You can also define in the code templates the relevant regulatory frameworks, whether it's GDPR, whether it's HIPAA, and I should know, but I don't know all the European healthcare frameworks. But in the United States, there's a very important one called HIPAA, which is the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which talks about privacy in healthcare, for instance. So that would be a code module that would be imprinted upon the software development to make it compliant with those regulatory frameworks. Another framework here in the United States, and I know there's a very analogous one in Europe, is called software as a medical device. So for instance, if you have a pacemaker or some sort of device that's implanted in you, it's subject to certain rules from the FDA. And again, that framework could then be imprinted in one of our code templates to force the software development to be compliant with that healthcare regulatory directive. So I think that's one point of relevance for healthcare to assure that it's compliant with the conventions that are mandated in healthcare.
Thanks. I take the liberty as the coordinator right now of this last part, and you just said something that made me ask a question that if you can answer quickly, then we know that many of you of this audience could actually have a very relevant discussion later on. Do you believe that this approach, what you shared in the vision, also helps in explainable AI approach? I know this can be also taken as a buzzword, but the idea that the AI is more capable of human, and then if you try to explain that to humans, that actually sometimes is perceived as a hindrance in actually making all those good things with AI. Do you believe that this approach actually has the ability to help us with understanding it, but not, keeping it back from bringing all the benefits?
Yeah, it's definitely what I would call clear box as opposed to black box, because it's very defined, very transparent. So that is a very important difference. So I would say definitely yes.
All right. Thank you, Bjorn. At least I know that I will try to find out and know more about what you're doing. Let's give you an applause from here, Estonia. 11 hours from you.
Yep, thank you.
And I will now hand over to the next session moderator. And this session will be, now you have heard all the good things, maybe some careful things about AI. And Sergio MUÑOZ Lechando from, where are you based at, actually? Far away?
Yeah, far away, in Spain.
Spain? Okay. Warm place, warmer than we have here. But the idea is that now that you know what you want, Sergio will share a session how to buy the right things. And I will let Sergio do this moderation stuff. And as I promised, I will be your eyes and hands and whatever you need here locally. So if you need something to run or do, just let me know. Otherwise, the show is yours.
Thank you very much. So, hello again from Spain, and welcome to the session 4. That is called Procurement of AI System Navigating the Market. My name is Sergio MUÑOZ LEZCANO, Head of Digital Health and Business Development at Tecnalia Research and Innovation Foundation. There is a large applied research and technological development center in Spain, and also one of the largest in Europe. First of all, I would like to thank you to the organization of these fantastic sessions, and I would like also to apologize for not being present in Estonia today. So when we talk about in healthcare, the headlines, procurement and healthcare, the headlines usually highlight breakthrough algorithms or impressive diagnostics tools, or, for example, futuristic vision of patient care. But the truth is that none of this innovation reach patients unless someone can buy them, integrate them, and sustain them. Procurement may sound like a technical step, but in reality is the true battlefield where innovation either succeeds or fails. Today we'll explore procurement through 4 complementary lenses from the point of view of ethics and regulation, startups and investment, public research, development and institutional adoption. And finally, we will have an international procurement point of view of the best practices taking place in different countries. For discussion about these 4 hot topics, we are joined by 4 outstanding panelists. Dr. Khulood ALSAYEGH, a physician and healthcare policy leader at the Dubai Health Authority, shaping clinical standards and AI regulation in the region. Elizabeth Jennings, that is managing partner at Venture Labs Lab in the US, specializing in commercialization strategies and investment for healthcare startups worldwide. By the way, we also have with us Dr. Apostolos Dimitriadis, Innovation Manager at Fourth Center for Health in Greece, driving collaborations between research, public health, and clinical adoption. And finally, we have also with us Dr. Stephan Binder, co-founder and CEO of Kalms Consulting in Germany, with almost 20 years of experience in market access, reimbursement, and also strategic partnerships for digital health. Together, they bring points of view from regulation, investment, public innovation, and procurement practice. Exactly the miss we need to understand how AI move from labs to hospitals safely, at scale, and also in a sustainable way. So let's start with the foundation, regulation, and yes.
Sergio, just one note. We have some minor technical issues regarding Dr. Dimitriadis, so he's not with us here, so that you know. But all the rest are here, and they're smiling and waiting for your guidance. So that was just one thing, so that you know that he's not here.
Because the last news that maybe it would be possible to take into account with him. So, okay, thank you. So as I said before, let's start with the first topic, that is regulation, ethics, and trust. Because before hospitals can buy AI, as I said before, they need confidence that these systems are safe, explainable, and moreover, trustworthy. If you don't mind, you use your first names, okay? So my first question is drive to Khulood. So in that case, from your point of view, what are the main regulatory and ethical gaps in current AI procurement for healthcare?
Thank you for the question, Sergio, and thank you for the introduction. As a regulator, when it comes to developing standards for AI implementation, we don't just think of writing down the standards and guidelines. There are other inputs that we put into it. So we think of our values and our choices. And what sort of values are we adding, our human values that we're adding into those standardized care of AI? Because AI tends to amplify those biases that we put in. So if we look at an image, are we looking into something that is clear? Are we looking into clarity? Or a distorted image? And if it's a distorted image, this is highly amplified with AI. So there is a lot of caution when it comes to the regulation, because we want to make sure that we don't impact and add biases to writing the regulations. The second thing was the choices, and our choices may tend to be binary, and there was a lot of that discussion during the 2 days I've been here. Are we promoting, are we encouraging regulation, being more strict, being more safe, or are we opening to innovation? Are we being more protective or giving more freedom? Are we encouraging innovation or are we regressing it? And the way I would think of it is like there are no rivers without banks. There are no banks without rivers. So we shouldn't be having those binary divisions, and having a balance in between is what we're doing as regulators. And I keep getting those questions where, listen, Khulood, is AI is going to replace humans? And the answer to that was no. And we heard the presentation before that humans with AI would replace humans without. But the fact is, the reality is, it is replacing humans because the speed of deploying AI is way faster than creating new opportunities for humans. This is the reality of it. And that's another factor that we need to look into when we regulate, because if I'm going to be using AI, I need to train employees that would be using AI, and I need to create those opportunities. And the speed at which this is happening is very fast to keeping track with the governance. And the last thing that I would like to add is AI tends to be centralized in power around certain companies or technologists that are providing AI, and not so much with the end users. So the way I think of it is it has to be a more shared progress. So regulators are part of it, but who else or which other stakeholder is going to be part of this? So that we don't have it very much centralized and the power of certain organizations that are controlling, and we have very little input in that. I think these are the three main things, Sergio, that I feel as a regulator that would add. I mean, there are other factors that we hear when it comes to ethical implications, such as privacy and all this, but people know those. And I think these are the ones that I look into as a regulator. Thank you.
I would say that maybe the most difficult thing in when we talk about regulation and innovation is try to achieve this balance that you was commented before. So it's a very difficult way in that case. Moreover, when we are working with the startups and within innovators, because they are so far away from the regulation, and regulation imposed many restrictions. And, so achieve this kind of balance is quite important if we want to achieve a real deployment in AI, and mainly in healthcare. So thank you very much for your point of view, Khulood. Elizabeth, from an investor's startup point of view, how do these gaps translate into risks and a slower adoption?
You know, it's really interesting to think about those gaps, because I would say in terms of what you would suspect, like regulatory gaps, from the perspective of the United States, it's actually not that bad. We have specialized pathways for regulatory approval, specialized coding. So the US has done, I think, surprisingly, a decent job in making sure that we can actually get through AI pathways. Now, of course, that's in the last couple of years. If you had spoken about that maybe 5 years ago, it would have been fantasy. But the regulatory pathways are actually surprisingly smooth for something so new. So those are really not the concern. You just simply do that correctly. The bigger challenges are around the implications with introducing AI into healthcare. Now, it's maybe worth considering that when we think about AI, many people will think of LLMs like ChatGPT or Khulood or something like that. But truthfully, I would say about 90% of the AI applications I see in actual clinical operation are adopted by hospital systems that can scale from the European market to the US aren't like that at all. They're operational or clinical decision support tools. They're in imagery. They're in surgical applications, or they're biotech platforms. And these are completely different types of models with completely different types of data. The risk is much higher than an LLM that might take a note down incorrectly that a human would immediately spot. To a point that was made earlier, if you're actually predicating your decision on something that is regulated less than a diagnostic but carries similar clinical influence over the outcome of a patient, it can be very challenging. So from an investment perspective, what we're looking at much more two things. Can it actually be economically viable? And a small example of that is that many of these technologies, if you can, for instance, better gauge the volume of a tumor, as an example we saw earlier, that could have the implication of changing when an intervention is possible, because it can change how you continue to deliver therapies, when you might try to put a surgery together, or an intervention like a valve or other medical device. And because you may be changing where the standard of care would have been in practice, it may not be reimbursed correctly, or it may not be reimbursed at all, because you now have the information that we can detect this earlier. So from an investment standpoint, that makes the economics of this as a business in healthcare very challenging, because the rest of the infrastructure tends not to follow along with that. And the second part is just the operations of it, because if you make something more efficient, you are changing the workflow. And usually there is a consequence to that somewhere in how the systems truly work. And so we're very mindful of, while it might take a step away in one part of the value chain, it might add two later on. And that will really lower adoption. It'll take more time getting through pilots and saying, well, let's look at this because the first part's very exciting, but truthfully it's just spending a lot of money and lowering the amount of runway remaining when there were other features that needed to have been considered beforehand.
It's a good point, because I feel that many startups don't consider the solutions in that sense as solutions, even more. They build products instead of solutions that needs to be involved in the value chain if they want to deploy something with value. So the real gaps maybe are here. When the startups start to design something, they need to assess in a better way where and when will be the deployment and will be the value for this solution. Stephan, in Germany in particular, but in Europe in general terms, how are procurement frameworks adjusting for failing to AI needs for explainability or and continuous learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. I think we have to differentiate two different areas. So one is the regulatory area, and there in Europe with GDPR, with MDR, IVDR, and also with the European AI Act, we have a certain framework that works pretty well. I mean, certainly for established technology, it was a painful way. As we all know, introduction of MDR was a nightmare. IVDR maybe a little less, but still difficult. But at least for static models in AI, I would say we have methods that from a regulatory perspective work. However, if I look at it from the implementation side, my answer would be a little different. And there are some topics that have been discussed extensively today. And the number one topic is clinical evidence. And I was really happy in the previous session to hear so much about the importance of clinical evidence and about the lack of clinical data and in many of the solutions that come to market. And I think we have to differentiate if a company comes to market, whether they come to market as a fully commercial solution or if they come to market as a experimental technology that in collaboration with a hospital needs to be further developed. And I know there are some Germans here in the room. If we have new clients, I always tell them, like many clients from the US that we have, I always tell them a story. The story goes, if you go to a French doctor with a new technology, the French doctor will say, can I be the first? I want to be the first. If you talk to a German doctor, the German doctor says, who is already using it? I definitely do not want to be the first. So getting this initial step into the market, especially in Germany, is very difficult. And that, of course, reflects with procurement how it's being done in Germany. And I just found a report which is really worth reading from Bitkom, the Association of the German Informatics Industry, published in May. And at that time, when they were sending out the questionnaires, only 15% of German doctors were actively using at least one AI solution. So we are talking about something which is absolutely not established in clinical routine so far. Imaging, very different. Radiology is the majority of these cases, but obviously not everyone in a hospital or doctor's office is a radiologist. On the other hand, about 80% of the medical doctors see AI as something that is beneficial to the patients and to their own workflow. So there is an openness to it for sure. And that again also reflects on procurement, and with the AI companies that we are currently representing in Germany, it's easier than with any other technology to find people in hospitals that want to talk and want to discuss. Not necessarily buy, but at least want to talk and discuss about the technology and about the possibilities. Interestingly, and that would be my last point for that, about, again, 80% of the doctors say AI needs to be regulated, severely, heavily regulated. But on the other hand, 60% of the doctors say that regulation is what prevents new technology to be introduced into the market. So we clearly have a discrepancy here between those two facts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Stephan. I have a question for you in order to close this first topic. Taking advance from your previous comments related to clinical evidence and data, I would put on the table a main concept that is collected in the new AI law, AI Act, that is sandbox. I don't know, but I don't know if you have information, but here in Spain, we have the first sandboxes that have been deployed in Europe. We have the first agency related with AI, and we have the first examples related with these kind of things, how to achieve evidence, how to collect data, valuable data. So I will share with you that could the regulation actually become an enabler, for example, through sandboxes or maybe temporary reimbursement projects or, for example, conditional approvals? Do you think that regulation in that case could accelerate these kind of projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to a certain degree, yes. And what we see now is that there are a lot of small islands. I mean, if I talk to people in hospitals, they have their own technologies. They create their own departments actually developing technologies that basically run in an island, so to say. But obviously, I mean, this is not the future of commercial business. I mean, at some point, you need to go beyond that. But another point that was, mentioned several times today is that the real difficulty is scaling from prototype or single center use towards something which is really applicable in the entire country, in the entire market.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, from your point of view and with your experience in the US and your knowledge of you, obviously.
If I may add to this answer to this question as well, in the UAE we do have a sandbox that is starting at a regulatory level, and one thing that I feel it does definitely support to see if this is applicable, if it's going to work, and all of that. But I think one main important thing to remember in these sandboxes is what sort of data are we deploying, are we using in this sandbox, because the quality of the data would differ. and then we would find out whether it is biased towards a certain degree or not. So again, it really depends on that. So in the UAE, where I described yesterday our health informatics system, which is it's called NABED, which connects all of the health records together. So it's a large pool of data. But as we all know, when it comes to healthcare data, some of these data are unstructured, and some are structured. To what extent are we using that data that we're collecting in this pool of sandbox, in order for us to actually utilize the right data for our society that would reflect what would work for us in the UAE, for example, or not. It's just a comment that I felt it's a challenge that we're facing right now, and we're implementing the sandbox. So yes, it does help, it does support, but there are some challenges in there as well, depending on the data quality in particular, I think.
Elizabeth, from your point of view?
Could you repeat that? I think we
Yeah.
catch it.
Your approach, point of view related with this question, with the last question.
So difficult to understand.
Related with the sandboxes and regulation and so on. Which is your approach?
I'm going to talk about sandboxes now. So, it's interesting because in the US, we try to do everything all at once, which means we usually do many things poorly. The good news is that we find out pretty quickly what works well and what doesn't work well. And we also have the good benefit of collaborations with many entrepreneurs and institutes around the world. So when you think about all the different things that are happening, usually they're also happening in the US, and usually actually pretty collaboratively. When you think about the Cleveland Clinic, there's offices all around the world in collaboration with different institutes. The same thing with Mayo Clinic. So there's many different kinds of sandboxes, there's many different kinds of frameworks for setting up IRBs and INDs, depending on what you're doing, with ethics committees, and making sure that you're getting to a place where the facilities can say, we can operationalize this technology. From my perspective, something that facilitates this area, if you're developing a knowledge product or you have some data, the biggest thing isn't just being able to prove it, because when you're talking about, a sandbox and seeing what could be, you're usually using retrospective data, which is nice, but usually incomplete compared to prospective data in situ in actual clinical practice. So the more longitudinal data set you have, the more accurate your prospective studies are going to be. And that's typically where we need to get out of this. We're just kind of playing around doing a research project and seeing how that might work, but actually finding some of these institutes that have dedicated pathways for prospective studies is usually the actual best evidence that you have something that isn't just scientifically meaningful, but will actually work for practitioners as they are solving whatever problem your tool works for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for your valuable insights. I would say that even when regulation allows innovation, for example, in the case of sandboxes, we often see this connection between what AI developers build and what health systems are willing or maybe able to buy. So let's start with the second of the hot topics that we have here today. Let's start with market disconnections. And my first question is for Elizabeth. And I asked you, where is the biggest disconnection between AI developers and health system buyers?
There was an interesting point that was made in a conversation earlier today, which was basically led to, is there actually a clinical use case for the technology that's being created? Do we actually need to know, whatever you're trying to prove? Usually that's, something that is more accurate or more specific, something that is more sensitive, something that gives better clinical context to a specific decision point, or an inflection point in which you're weighing different risks. And I'll give you an example is that usually when you're working with patients, you don't just have textbook cases where everything is very obvious. And so AI can be very interesting in providing more information to determine how to make something more personalized. So in cardio-oncology, for instance, every cancer patient is receiving a certain amount of cardiotoxic therapeutics to help reduce the proliferation of their cancer cells. And the unfortunate consequences, of course, that then it's damaging the structure of the heart. So every cancer patient needs to have continual data on the performance of the heart, but the clinician is weighing the risks of, do I try to treat the cancers more aggressively versus cause lasting structural heart damage? And AI models that are looking at those sort of very specific situations have a lot of opportunity, you know, to actually make a clinical difference, because the clinician is in that very specific niche market looking at something they have to do over and over again specific to that individual. And that's a different kind of task, a different kind of license for a clinician to have than, say, trying to just do something with greater throughput, like just reading radiology scans day in and day out. There's definitely opportunity for that, but the adoption, the actual clinical need for it is going to make that a lower priority than something that requires definite, consequential, and highly personalized medicine every time, like in cardio-oncology. And I think that mishap of we made something a little bit faster, a little bit more accurate, a little bit more sensitive is a nice to have versus something that is clinically urgent, operationally urgent, and very specific to an unmet need that exists in the market.
And Elizabeth, in the US, taking into account your previous comment, okay, how do ROI pressures or reimbursement gaps or maybe return on trust create barriers for startups? And just let me put some light over the concept return on trust. By return on trust, I would say that we should understand the value created by building patient trust, or healthcare professionals' trust, or healthcare technology buyers' trust. So, which is the ROI pressures or reimbursement or return on trust barriers for the startups?
There's two kinds of trust, I think, that's the most relevant to our conversation right now. There's clinical trust. Is the data good? You heard garbage in, garbage out earlier, and how good the data is, I would say, 90% of the actual sales cycle in taking to market and getting revenue out of an AI product. You are going to be talking about that far more. I mean, this is, if you come from outside of healthcare, you have a 1% chance of succeeding in any of this. So that actual clinical discussion of the data structure, its relevance for demographics, its minimum biases, how all of that needs to be locked. So in other words, it can't still be training. They are not going to pay for or adopt something that isn't already, you know, peer-reviewed, published, clinical trials approved, you know, top to bottom. Absolutely not. And they are not going to give you their data to continue to improve it. No facility is interested in that. Because that data is also a product that they themselves can license out for other knowledge products. So it must be locked, it must be proven, and then so there's just the data integrity. And the second is cybersecurity. And that's so much more than HIPAA. HIPAA might get you into the parking lot, but it's not going to allow you into the building. And it's not just SOC 2 Type 2, it's not just all of the different government credentials, it's not just making sure your cloud data is in the correct space. It is the #1 biggest expense in the US for health systems because they get blackmailed all the time. It's truly if you're interested in why they won't adopt your technology, look up how frequently our healthcare systems are hacked. It is terrible, and it's usually third-party vendors. And so that is a very significant barrier that if you can show this is our process, you can't make guarantees because it's not a matter of when you get hacked, or if you get hacked, it's a matter of when. So that's going to be a huge portion of saying we have these processes in place, and this is how we're going to handle a data breach. This is how information is siloed, and these are the processes. If you lead with those sort of conversations, in addition to making sure your clinical data is sound, those two trust factors, I think, are absolutely imperative.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Today we have the opportunity to share this kind of visions because we have the US, the Middle East vision, but also the European and in particular the Germany vision. So Stephan, how does this compare with Europe and Germany, especially regarding, for example, with misdiagnosis, false positives, budget impact, or maybe, for example, lessons from the DIGA framework?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there are a lot of similarities, and the issues that we are seeing in the US are the same issues, in some points maybe to a little lesser degree, but the same issues that we are seeing in Europe and in Germany. If we look at diagnostics in particular, and now I'm, again, mainly speaking for the clients that we are seeing, startup companies in the diagnostic space, I think one of the big mistakes companies are making is not looking into the entire patient treatment pathway. And at the end, if you want to sell the technology, whether this is an AI-based technology or any other kind of medical device, first of all, evidence, we've already discussed it, but second, health economic aspects are relevant. And I think it's really important to differentiate, first of all, who is using the product from who is paying for the product, because the interest of a health insurance typically can be very different than the interest of a hospital. But at the end, you need to have both, because if the hospital is not buying it because it's changing the patient pathway in a way where they are making a financial loss, it won't help you. On the other hand, if the health insurance is not paying for it, if there's no reimbursement, because they are afraid of the financial consequences of it, it either does not help you. And so you need to address both questions. And obviously, almost every diagnostics company that approaches us has the dream of inventing the new screening method. But screening obviously comes with the most complexity. And in the last presentation that we've seen, where it was about measuring tumor volumes, about tracking progression, about giving information faster and more efficient, I think this is a very compelling story that's also easy to understand for everyone. On the contrary, if we talk about a new diagnostic test, and we see and have those clients for prostate cancer, for example, we're in a situation where doctors literally do not know how to treat these early diagnosed patients. So you create patients where nobody knows how to treat them. Of course, there are exceptions. There are some patients, fast progressing cancers, where you're happy you diagnose them early on. But you also get all these that are anyhow put on active surveillance later on and that live with the knowledge they do have cancer, but there's no treatment option for that. And that comes with a lot of financial consequences to the healthcare system, and it comes with a lot of psychological consequences for the patients and for their relatives.
I would say that many startups or small SMEs maybe have a very good technological products, but in many cases they have a lack of knowledge about the healthcare systems. It doesn't matter if it's based on Beveridge or Bismarck in Germany. And finally, this promotes that many of them fail in the market. And this is a shared problem all across Europe and for sure in the rest of the countries. Khulood, from your vision and experience in Middle East and Emirates, how can regulators and policymakers bridge these disconnects with clearer procurement or ethical guidance?
I think I'm going to be complementing the answers of both Stephan and Elizabeth when it comes to stakeholder involvement and definitely trust. When we think of regulators and policymakers, we think of them as the ones leading the orchestra. And they're the decision makers, and they hold in the responsibility and the responsibility. This means being accountable and at the same time being able to change things when things go wrong. But at the end of the day, it is an involvement of multiple teams. The orchestra would not go on without everybody, all the musicians being part of that stage. And that's where we need to include everyone and have that transparency in the process. So if the end user, which is in most of the cases when it comes to healthcare technologies, are not involved, how will they adapt a technology that they don't understand, that they don't believe? Being a physician, I was taught a certain way of teaching, a certain way of learning, a certain way of diagnosing patients. And now you come here and tell me that this AI is going to help you diagnose or is going to replace you with diagnosing. And there is that dilemma whether should I trust it or should I not? And for me to trust it, for me to be able to adopt it, it makes sense that I understand it and it makes sense to me and it has a purpose where I feel, yeah, we are used to evidence-based medicine. So if you're able to prove that to me and convince me, and the only way you would is if I'm being part of it. So I think stakeholder engagement is very important to build that trust so they can be able to share with you the risks and share with you the rewards and share with you the responsibility, which I think is very, very important. Another thing which I wanted to highlight as well, and based on the conversations we had, is when we set up the regulations, it's easy to say, okay, there has to be a human in the loop. And we've spoken about a few radiological examples here when it comes to AI diagnosing. And human in the loop means a human or doctor or someone is accountable for the decision that they make. If that X-ray or that image through AI says that there is cancer or something like that, the physician has to be accountable and say, yes, I agree, and put it in. So being a human in the loop, I always tend to ask this question, human in the loop, where in the loop? Is the AI making the decision and then I, as a human, read it and say, yeah, I think so, that's correct. I agree with the AI and I'm being accountable for it and maybe biased by the AI decision? Or is it the other way around? I make a decision and say, this is this. And then I check what AI think and agrees with me, or I may change my decision based on what AI does. So it's not straightforward as it seems. So having that increase of awareness, that fundamental steps, and for us to understand, being part of it, makes that decision a little bit more acceptable than actually just giving you the solution, there you go, deal with it. So I think one way for a policymaker to work is to have that shared responsibility with the end users who are going to be deploying that AI tool, who are going to be using it, and who are going to be benefiting from it.
Thank you so much. And finally, for closing this second topic, I will ask you, if the health system are structurally ready to buy what startups or SMEs are building, or even more, for example, here in Europe, we have different tools in order to de-risk the solution and co-create between healthcare systems and companies this kind of needs. I say that, for example, procurement, pre-commercial procurement or public innovation procurement. Would you say that health systems are ready to buy what startups are building, or these kind of tools are underused?
The question was for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
For all of you three.
Sorry, Sergio, but can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. in summary, something that we have put on the table during this second topic is the health systems are not maybe structurally ready to buy what startups or SMEs are building. And even more, for example, here in Europe, we have different mechanisms, different tools, for example, pre-commercial procurement or public innovation procurement, in order to de-risk the solutions and be more aligned with the needs of the clinical people, with the needs of the patients, and put on the table real value solutions. So do you think that health systems are ready to buy these kind of solutions coming from startups, taking into account trust and all the things that we have, sir?
Yes. Obviously, we don't want to stop innovation from flourishing. At the same time, we want to ensure that there is a safe process in which we bring it through. So again, going back to what we have been discussing earlier, putting that all together, we need to ensure that there is transparency in the whole process. If we're going to bring in those startups and deploy them, it has to be very clear, and it has to make sense, and it has to have a purpose. I think the example Stephan said earlier is if it brings something that will not benefit the society, it's not a solution that it's going to add value, and it's going to create distortion, it's going to create stress, it's going to create biases, it's going to create confusion. It is not the right way. At the same time, we want to ensure that through that startup process that we are being it's relevant and it would add value in terms of evidence base. Again, as physicians, we want to ensure that we're bringing in a technology that would enhance us as physicians and support us, rather than something that will confuse and give us biases, because then we will start changing our decisions based on that AI tool. And for that to work all together, I think one thing that I emphasized on the last time was training. I think it's very, very important to ensure that the manpower who's handling this is properly trained to be able to deploy AI and understand it and have the fundamental basic questions. What is this AI tool doing? Why am I using it? What happens when things go wrong? How resilient it is? That basic questions should be there, fundamental questions by everyone. And you know, sometimes when you buy a product from the supermarket and it has that label, nutritional label, to tell you what's in it, AI tools should have something very similar, like an AI model that tells me to what extent I can trust this AI. What is it doing? What are its downsides? What happens when things go wrong? So that when you have that level of transparency in the whole process, we can then work together. And for it to deploy, we need everybody to be engaged in this, as I said earlier. So technologists talking to regulators, talking to patients, talking to healthcare providers, they all need to be talking to each other and not work in different silos.
And maybe to add to it, and we have a session, the same group tomorrow, about differences between the countries. So I think that's a topic we certainly talk about tomorrow. But from a German perspective, clients, so in this case hospitals or doctors, are expecting a local subsidiary of the company. They're expecting a local customer service that also speaks German language. And I think this is, of course, for startup companies, for foreign startup companies, it's a big challenge. It's the disadvantage of being in Germany compared to English-speaking countries or countries that predominantly speak English language. There are, of course, exceptions. As long as you stay really in the hospitals, it might work with English, but at some point you need to have local infrastructure and you need to build this local infrastructure. Otherwise, your success will be very limited. And that, again, has to do with trust, because what we've seen, not only in AI, I mean, that happened in medtech or happens in medtech as well, is startup companies are appearing on the market. The team is being trained, the users are being trained. It's a long procurement process. And at some point, the company just disappears, either because they run out of money or because additional evidence shows it's not as good as it used to be, or another product gets the gold standard. And so finally, you as the user are in a situation that you spend a lot of resources in introducing and establishing a technology, just to learn that it's not longer being used and suddenly you're outdated. And I think all these challenges need to be addressed. And the more complex your solution is, the more important these parts are.
If I may add, even the cultural context in different countries, and I may give a quick and small example. So I was trained in Europe, and a lot of my training when I was an intern was supported by nurses. So nurses were decision makers in Europe and helped me and trained me and enabled me. I must say that, and I give credibility to them as well. It's not the case in the UAE, for example. Nurses would follow doctors' decisions. They wouldn't prescribe a Panadol or paracetamol without a doctor's decision. And I came across AI tools where the nurse in triage makes a decision using AI whether this patient is going to be considered in which category of triaging, or is this patient safe to wait, or it needs to go to emergency, using AI and making the decision based on AI. Nurses are not going to do that. So actually contextualizing it into the system and the culture and the way things work, it's different. And I think this is something that would be different if this exact same tool was probably in Germany or in the States, would be a completely different experience.
Yeah, from your point of view, from the point of view of an investor, Alicia. Do you hear me? Elizabeth?
Sure. Could you repeat some of that for me, please?
Just share with us the similar question that has been answered by Khulood and okay.
So, about the differences between Europe and the US, one of the interesting things is that we have, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure we've crossed the several thousand mark of AI products in the US that have been approved by the FDA. So, I mean, this has really taken off. It's got that beautiful hockey stick curve of not just approvals, but actual adoption in the US. We really do have facilitated regulatory pathways for it. We're working on building more reimbursement pathways for it, but there's a lot of opportunity in value-based care because that's really where the value propositions are for a lot of these technologies. If you think about, if you're familiar with the US service, just the throughput, increasing billability, in other words, being able to charge more for your business and healthcare works really well with our traditional systems, but a lot of the solutions I'm seeing come out of Europe are cost savings, are earlier diagnoses with leading to better patient outcomes. It's reducing provider burden. It's improving population health. And all of these areas fit very well into our value-based care model where you're not necessarily contingent on getting the correct CPT code because that's not how you're calculated in business. You're framed in different metrics that are much more aligned to the systems that you have here. So I see that, honestly, there's huge opportunity if you do have an AI product from outside the U.S. into the U.S. because it is less regulated. But we also, I think, over the last 3 years, every single giant integrated delivery network, huge hospital systems in the U.S. that I have met with, and we're talking somewhere 40 or 50 personal relationships and connections, have dedicated committee pathways to adopting new AI technologies because there's so many of them. We actually have a phrase for it called AI fatigue. Everything is AI now, and some of it's AI, and some of it's real AI, but they have procurement pathways where they can actually, they have processes now for evaluating specifically different modalities of AI, the use cases that they're interested in, and people whose job it is to tell entrepreneurs politely, I'm sorry, the position has been filled and we're no longer interested. So that's a big difference. When you think about, should I even look at Europe or the UAE or the US, I don't think these are mutually exclusive opportunities. It has a lot to do with where the value proposition is respected economically the most, because that's the financial reality of companies. You do need some revenue, and it needs to move along before you run out of your cash flow. But the good news about the US is that the burden of providing safe, ethical care is put much more on the providers themselves, in the sense that rather than a government regulatory body. So because of all of this, because we have the regulatory sorted more, reimbursements coming along, or you can move to value-based care. In clinical practice, they have the committee pathways, but they're also more willing to amend an investigational review board to say we have specific ethics to evaluate this technology, put it in situ, put it into clinical practice, do the legalese correctly, do everything correctly to get the data we want out of it. But the burden's on them to learn how to operate this correctly. So there's more adoption enthusiasm, I would say, as well, combined with the fatigue of everything is now AI.
It's maybe quickly to add to this, the interesting point, I think, that I realized in the past month in discussions with European startup companies that were interested in going to the US is that whenever we encourage them to do some diligence and really look into potential competition and what's already on the market and what's being developed, that obviously there are thousands of companies now that are developing AI-driven healthcare solutions, and probably it's a little easier to at least start a project there than developing a new pacemaker or whatever kind of implant. And so I think it comes back to stakeholder engagement, and you need to be sure that you have the right contacts in place, that you are connected to the people that will support the introduction of your technology. And in some cases, collaboration might be a better strategy than going into a competition with a local company. And I think that counts for both directions.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your point of view. Let's go with the next topic that is linked with all the topics that we have previously served. And if we go deeper, we have been talking about barriers, we have been talking about obstacles in order to access the market, okay? But this is a question, for example, for Stephan, okay? How do risk-averse cultures in terms of healthcare systems, or complex procurement rules, or lack of capacity play a key role in this hesitation of prevent public health institutions from early adopters of AI?
Yeah, I think we have to understand this is not a static situation. I mean, it's developing fast, and you really need to be involved, engaged, and inform yourself, independent on which position in this process you have to be able to navigate and to deal with it. And again, speaking very generally, if you talk to purchasing departments of German hospitals, about 1/3 of the German hospitals are under such a financial pressure that in no case they would introduce any new technology. They are what we call followers. So once something becomes a gold standard, they will introduce it, but they are just afraid of all the burdens that and all the risks that come with the new technology. And so it's a waste of time, and still many companies are doing this and making this mistake, but it's a waste of time to going into those hospitals. Of course, you have innovative hospitals where this is different and where there are capacities to introduce new technologies, where they are interested in supporting it, where they even internationally collaborate. And so those are the hospitals that you need to contact with and that you need to address. And finally, you need to have a sponsor in that hospital. And this is also something which is, in my opinion, heavily underestimated. You need to have someone who really drives this project through all the instances that are needed, whether it's the data protection officer, it's, of course, procurement, hospital controlling, all these things, filing reimbursement application if needed, for example. And if you have somebody in that hospital or a group of people that are enthusiastic about this, then it can go pretty fast. And we see these cases. I mean, not being disappointing all the time. I mean, there are really good cases where it goes pretty fast. And but at the end, you need support. You need a good story to tell, and you also need to have an idea about the financial consequences of what you are doing.
Yeah. And I feel that AI is affecting, in fact, to the culture of the organizations. This is not only a way of diagnosis or treatment or follow-up patients, but also involves the way you move in the organization. For example, in managing processes or procurement rules or process or activities. So the AI is changing the whole puzzle. From that point of view, Khulood, can policy tools, for example, we were talking about sandboxes previously, but also we could put on the table pilot funding or ethical assessment. Can policy tools accelerate institutional adoption of AI?
Yes, 100%. And it's part of our process in the UAE to assess and evaluate any platform or application or any AI tool from an ethical principle. So I've mentioned a few earlier in the conversation, which is like the transparency of it, being able to, how predictable it is, how clear it is, and are the roles and responsibilities set up clearly from the very beginning. For example, one of the AI tools that was given to a patient in the UAE that did a wrong reading, and the Dubai Health Authority usually evaluates those applications, and they were like, "Oh no, we did the evaluation. It's not our fault." The clinic that used that app said, "Well, not to us, it must be the company." The manufacturer said, "I got it registered, I gave it to you." The Ministry of Health that registered it said, "No, I just registered it as an application." So whose fault is it? So therefore, when things are great, everybody claps hands. But when things go wrong and we start pointing fingers, that's where the patient is the one lost at the end in this whole translation. So as an ethical principle, we set up the roles and responsibilities from the very beginning to see who's accountable for what. And if that process is very clear, everyone knows what are their roles. Same goes with accountability, for example. Setting up the roles and accountability, to what extent is it there? So obviously, if it's very clear and everyone knows the roles and everyone knows it inside out, there's a question mark whether is this going to be breaching the privacy too much or to what extent. So there has to be a balance between how much a human in the loop and to what extent that human in the loop is. And then obviously privacy, security measures. Things will go wrong, as Elizabeth has said earlier. Things are going to go wrong. There's nothing 100% secured. To what extent are you resilient and getting back up on your feet? So if the data is breached, for example, how long before you're able to stop it? Is it going to be after 135 days when everything goes out? To what extent are we able to get back and stop it from happening? And what are our policies that we work around it? And where is that data stored? Where is it located as well? Because this impacts, we're talking about human healthcare data. It's very precious, and to what extent it's being controlled in the country. And then, obviously, the last thing which I've highlighted so far in my conversation was the biasing, and seeing if it's going to present the country's ethnicity. And are we dealing with everyone? Is it going to be, one time I got I like giving examples because it's more practical. One time I got a group of men, technologists that came to me, 4 men, and I sat with them for coffee and gave me an application for women's health. And I told them, where's the women? So they're talking about an app for an obstetric app that would help OB-GYN and gynecologists, and none of them are doctors, and there was no gynecologists, and there was no women. So it has to represent, and they all looked at each other, and they said, "Oh, but yeah." I was like, "Okay." So these are the 4 principles that we are guided by in the ethical principles when it comes to any AI tool that we assess in Dubai Health Authority. And these are the exact same principles that I have embedded into the AI regulation as a federal level. And we got into more details on each of these principles because there is no right or wrong when it comes to ethics, especially in healthcare. There's always going to be some sort of dilemmas. But I think as a main principle, setting up the roles early and knowing your role in it and how clear is the process is a fundamental requirement for the other principles to fall and fit into it.
Elizabeth, from the startup side, what procurement mechanisms, for example, faster pilots or co-development or staged adoption, will help most the startups, obviously, in order to achieve the market in a quicker way? If you could select some of these mechanisms based on the US in order to export to the European Union, for example, which one you select?
So if you're a European company looking to enter the US, that's two questions here. What I think facilitates adoption in the US the most, obviously pilots are great. You may be disappointed to learn that you will often be paying for those pilots. So when we say paid pilots, we mean you're paying, not them. And it could be, to the point of about $250,000 in consequence to the company. So depending on sophistication and whatever it is you're trying to accomplish with them. So those have meaning if you're trying to prove it in the specific type of workflows we have. Things that are done inpatient may be different to outpatient, may be different than what you have in Europe. Demographic differences may need to be repeated depending on your training data and your structuring. So there are nuances that will have to be clarified depending on your segment of the market. One thing that I think is worth mentioning is that if you are coming from a European perspective, the very first way you need to segment your market approach into the AI market for actual adoption is to align the economics of this. In other words, make sure that the values that you are creating through the implementation of your technology is actually something that can be purchased in the US. If your benefit is, for instance, cost savings through workflow efficiency, it is very unlikely that that is going to have the economic benefit in which you are financially rewarded for your contributions. So while that may be, or you need to, or in most of the market, I should say, there's always an instance in which it is, but it might not be worth the pain for you. However, there may be other consequences to your technology in which there are other ways to frame your business. So navigating towards where you can actually be adopted first is much more important than saying we have a specific clinical implication, therefore I'm going to go talk to that clinician, because that clinician is just one part of the entire value analysis committee. So speaking to the right people first in the right segment is far more important than, getting into a pilot program or going to speak to Mayo Clinic. They're lovely, but they speak to everyone. So it's like getting a ticket to stand in line. What will really help, truthfully, because your actual sales cycle is going to be about 18 months. You can have the most brilliant AI technology in the world. 12 months of that will be conversations, like we've said before, of all of the data, how this is done, going over it with different people, different stakeholders. And another 6 months will be going through the business agreement on cybersecurity, answering the same questions over all sorts of different evaluations. And then you may get a $3 or $4 million contract. So if you can live that long, it's great. But you may not. And so really, if you're looking at the US market, the best possible way for capital efficiency will be to integrate with a partner that lives upstream from you in the value chain. So for instance, if you're in radiology, look at PACS partners. If you're in cardiology, look at, echocardiogram, PACS partners or sonographers or different data measurements. You will at some point need to integrate with the EMR. You will say you don't have to, you will. It will be painful. So at that point, you need to make sure you're somewhere in clinical practice where they absolutely need to work with you and cannot go around you, or they won't want to log in and move to another station. If you get adopted in a small area and they don't actually use your technology because they are lazy and used to doing something a different way and don't want to log back in because you couldn't integrate with the EMR easily, you will not renew that contract. They'll say, wait, what was procurement doing again? Because these are very, very large systems. So for your longevity, just naturally being integrated into other software, other technologies, other platforms that are already in the market will beat it 1,000-fold over 99% of the time. For Americans looking at the EU market, that's a completely different thing, and for that I would refer them to my good friend Stephan.
Well, where to start? I mean, I think first of all, understanding patient pathways, and you mentioned inpatient versus outpatient, and obviously we see significant differences between the US and Europe, most European countries, where patients are being treated, how long patients would stay in a hospital, all these topics, and that, I mean, goes as far as to the point that you have to adapt your marketing slogans for that. I mean, we were helping a pretty well-funded startup company from Minnesota to go to Europe, actually start with CE mark first before they went for FDA. That was before MDR. Now it has changed a little bit, maybe. Topic for tomorrow. That company was making a claim on their website and also their marketing material that patients can go home the same day. Technically right. From a reimbursement perspective in Germany, a nightmare, because there's a mandatory stay of 3 nights in the hospital. And this is a process you don't want to argue with any auditing body, that every patient is so sick that they have to stay for 3 nights for a technology where the company claims it can be a day treatment, a day case, basically. So I would say, first of all, understand similarities, understand differences, understand that regulatory-wise, Europe is one framework, but reimbursement-wise, it's all individual countries. And you need to deal with all these countries separately, and you need to find solutions for all these countries separately.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephan. And finally, for the last topic, the topic number 4, we will discuss about procurement models and future directions. Previously, we have been discussing something about this, but let me ask you, Stephan, how should procurement evolve to handle modularity, continuous learning, and value-based contracting?
That's a very good question, and honestly, I don't have a clear answer to that. I think this is something we will see over time, and I'm curious to hear what you would say to this. But I mean, you know, starting from prevention, going over diagnostics, the main point in any discussion, in every discussion that I'm attending right now, is healthcare systems being under pressure and people not understanding the consequences of new ways of treating or diagnosing patients. And this is not because people are so stupid, it's because it's so complex. And if you look into statistics, the largest part of healthcare expenses happens in the last years or the last year of a patient's life, in average. And so if you work on technologies that make people live longer, it probably from a financial point of view just means that you push the point in time when you need to pay for the healthcare of that person more to the future. So you increase the overall healthcare expenses. And so I think right now, and maybe this does not exactly answer your question, but you know, if I look at it from a very practical point of view, it's the time of stepwise innovation. It's the time of solutions that work, that makes processes more efficient, faster, at small additional benefits, but are not necessarily changing the world because people are afraid of changing the world. And then, I mean, we represent 3 geographical areas that are pretty rich. This is not the majority of people. That's also something that we should have in mind. And there's a large group of people that have better access to healthcare every year and that are able to and willing to pay for better healthcare, but not necessarily premium price. But still, that's a big market. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just what comes to my mind.
Could I add a few points onto that? You know, there's a couple of areas that I think I see internationally work really, really well, that I really appreciate your thinking, your perspectives, and just the way research has been incentivized that translate well into the newer procurement pathways we have in the US and value-based care. What we're calling value-based care and what you're calling value-based care are not always actually the same thing. You know, we do tend to be divided by a common language. But what's interesting, so like chronic care, for instance. So there's the palliative care and aging care, and this is something that I think all of our populations really have the same economic pressures. But chronic care, we have frameworks for care delivery and economics called accountable care organizations. Sounds like it was named by a bunch of politicians for some reason. No one knows why. But what it does is it offers a framework for these types of organizations to increase patient compliance, which is something that I see do quite well, but difficult to actually economically value. But in these ACOs, especially chronic care ACOs, if you have technologies that do, instead of just pushing where that burden is, you try to absolve it and underwrite it throughout because you're not looking at an episode of care. Like, for instance, someone's last 2 years, they require many episodes of care. They continue to deteriorate. They get, different comorbidities that stack. They get more therapeutics. They require more interventions. Those are each episodes of care. In value-based care modeling within an ACO framework, you're taking all of that and you're saying, here's what we think we're going to capitate this specific patient's type for a specific price, and you'll pay out that price, and then it's up to the organization to adopt new technology that helps prevent those costs from going over that. If they go over the number, they lose money. If they stay under the number, they get to keep all of it. So it's a little bit like blackjack. Sounds kind of American. But it works well because it incentivizes them to find new, more efficient ways that increase quality outcomes without having to just decide, when are we going to pay? I think those are really interesting opportunities that I'm seeing come out, particularly in Europe, because we have such similar problems there. Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. In that way, Elizabeth, we have value-based care, we have value chain. At the same time, we have a huge amount of new solutions, of new products. So from your point of view, should procurement shift from product purchase to service partnership, especially in this context? For example, when we talk about chronic disease that affects a lot of people all over the world.
So it's interesting because one of the interesting things, if you're looking at it with, this is going to take me a long time, I would encourage you, like this getting to revenue in my business, or figuring out, is this product a business, or this idea, this knowledge product, the service, the data you have, whatever it is it something that needs to live on its own, or is it something that can stay within my academic framework or other research area? I would encourage you, again, not to think of our 3 markets as separate entities, because we all interact in very similar ways as people, even if workflows are different and the economics are different. So there's still opportunities. You just have to choose which one you're going to do first and use these things to spiral into new opportunities that are created along the way. When you're looking at, does this economically matter to me? Can I let this live on its own? Products do well because products are easy to make tangible. You can put in specific benefits and say, this is the outcome of using it. So one thing I see work really well in Scandinavia, in Finland, in the Baltics, is you have interesting ways of thinking, and this may be a little bit of the Nokia effect, interesting ways of thinking about ICT and having integrated data from different wearables and different devices. Why this matters in chronic care and whether or not this is a product or a service or how that works is that then you can put in unique identifiers to say, actually, you adopted us, and now you have this data product because we can collate information from one wearable, one piece of remote monitoring, something in situ, and then say, okay, the patient took their medicine, their breathing has changed, which can be an incredibly valuable diagnostic point to triage if the patient is deteriorating or something has changed of significance. And we have information about the context when they do need to go into a clinical practice that gets credit at the end of the day for saying our technology was accountable for this value creation in the patient care or somewhere down the line. And that's something I think is actually a very big opportunity. In that case, you have products, but you also have the service of being able to tell the hospital facility, hey, we mattered, we earned you $7 for every minute this patient wasn't sneezing too much. I'm being silly, but whatever the actual clinical consequence was, is actually being able to account for that financially is a service that could be very, very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Khulood, you previously talked about the tools that you use in the EU. So what role can Middle East frameworks where AI ethics assessment is advanced quickly play in shaping international best practice?
I couldn't hear the question. Can you just repeat the question, please?
Yeah. What role can Middle East frameworks, such as you commented before, your tools in order to evaluate other assets, the AI tools, AI products? Well, what role can Middle East frameworks where AI ethics assessment is advanced quickly play in shaping or export international best practices?
Yeah, okay. So it's all about collaboration, which is very important to get different perspectives. And I think the challenges that we're facing in the Middle East are very similar to the challenges that are being faced in Europe and in the States as well. So I think it's working together and tackling a lot of those is very important. And being involved more in these seminars and exchanging ideas, which people tend not to do that anymore. We need to be talking more to each other and exploring potential possibilities of either collaborating or opportunities and see how we can work together. So in the UAE, we've opened that in order to have more cross-border support and collaboration on projects. And I just wanted to add a little bit more on the awareness in the whole process, and particularly when it comes to value-based healthcare. So during the pandemic, we've noticed there was a big shift in terms of people more focused towards preventive medicine and even more so towards self-care and being healthy. And we also noticed a major shortage in manpower, particularly in healthcare providers. And this continues to go shorter and a problem and burden in many countries, not just in the UAE. And it's continuing because, at least from where I come from, nobody wants to be a doctor anymore. They all want to be bloggers. Okay? And technology, to some extent, covers all of these gaps to some extent. But there has to be enough awareness in that sense for them to adopt that technology. And the collaboration that happens between different countries and involving healthcare professionals from around the world to support and collaborate to support the patient's well-being and to support that preventive measure is a key 100% in working towards that direction. And again, I emphasized again on awareness and awareness and awareness because we had a conversation, me and Elizabeth yesterday, on a blogger who said, I don't need a doctor anymore. I have ChatGPT to solve all of my problems. And we don't know when that ChatGPT is saying the truth or lying. And that's another problem that we're facing. And I think it's not just in the Middle East. I think it's everywhere, those challenges. It's like, do we need physicians? Do we need a system? Do we need anything? And people forget that everything in that system and that AI is fed into, so it really depends on the input. This AI wouldn't have responded to your question if it wasn't,
designed to tell you what it wants.
Designed to tell you what it wants, exactly. So the collaborative measure is not just to work together, but to increase that awareness collectively as internationally as well.
So, thank you very much. We are almost in time, okay? But I have a final question for all. So if you could change one thing in how AI procurement is handled today, whether it's a regulation or a mindset or even a process, what would it be?
To me, it will be definitely to increase trust. I think in one word. If you trust the system, you'd adopt it more easier. You would ensure that there's more inclusivity and there will be more transparency.
I would speed up the rate at which AI that improves scientific understanding and which new interventions can be executed safely is actually correlated with reimbursement, which is a big problem. I mentioned this earlier. If your AI enables earlier disease detection, cool story. We're still going to wait till the patient gets there for reimbursement. So from the US perspective, you have liability in some very nervous patients. So it doesn't actually matter. There's that huge gap between AI improving the science, the medicine, and then actually being economically viable and considered the standard of care as those are paired. So I would improve the processes to hopefully not use AI to review all of the science to decide if it's valid, but to figure out how to truncate that time period.
Yeah. You make it difficult for me because
Sorry,
what you said, I can just repeat, but I would add on the purchasing side, project management and resources. We see a great demand for that right now. There's hospital administration is overwhelmed with work, and things that do not really fit into the scheme are left aside easily. And on the company side, really please forget that there is something like low-hanging fruit, because in healthcare this is not happening, and about 50% of the startup companies I'm talking to are still searching for the low-hanging fruit, just to never find it. And I think there's a good reason, because none of us wants to be treated with something which comes to market without any evidence, without any proof it's working.
I don't know if we have 5 minutes more in order to let the audience.
Well, actually, Sergio, we don't, because there is bus and also there is long day, and so yeah. But certainly you may have final words of wisdom, which we all appreciate from you. But yeah, if you can possibly wrap it up, that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights. I think it has been a very rich discussion. And if today's session shows us anything, it's that procurement is not a dry technical detail. It's the bridge between innovation and maybe the real impact for patients. So please join me in giving them, our panelists, a warm round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. A great discussion. Also, thank you, the panelists. And let's make another applause for all of us who stayed, till the very end. And so yes, we agreed we will make brief wrap up. So, well, of course, you can stay here, and but. Actually, this is over now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there we go.
Well, we're like half of the bus, so please, we'll have to keep wrapping up.
But the picture, yeah. We need a picture without me, but you okay.
Like,
Which diagonal? There's... Oh, like this way,
like this?
okay.
okay.
Yeah, Sergio is online. I can see him here.
Yeah.
So Sergio, smile. Now there is a photo of you. And you are 3 times as big as all the others. So
Quite big.
keep smiling because, you know, they're still taking the photos. So. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, so there is a, well, we agreed we'll make the wrap up from the afternoon session to the morning one. So Janos will then also take the overall conclusions as well. But what I learned from this afternoon is that you really need to know what you want to buy. I mean, it started from the session that I moderated myself, where we heard these lessons from, you know, sometimes politicians tell you what to buy, then, you know, doctors develop it themselves. Then there is this innovation funds that support you. But really, before you start asking how to buy, you need to know what to buy. And then I think this last discussion very well illustrated also the discussion before that. So is it open or closed? You know, that you need, it takes a lot of time to find the evidence. At the same time, it seems that technology is moving so fast ahead, so that once you get the evidence, it's already about the 3-year-old solution. And therefore, the 3 different regions, at least to me, painted quite an interesting picture. And I would say that really we here in Europe should somehow look what's to kind of to maintain our approach, which is you know, built on consensus and finding the right way. And then we heard that, you know, there is no money, and the problem is that there will not be any money, so that waiting until the money comes probably will not be the solution. Which means that when we hear that in US there is good regulatory pathway, but it is very strongly pushed by the private capital, because some of those companies can make big losses, and just, you know, they expect that the winners will take it all. And in the Gulf region, we at least, it seems to me that there is very kind of strong stewardship by the government. And it's not that it does, you know, neglect the others, but the strategy is very clear, the money is behind that. And also it means that this uptake is fast. And so I really hope that be it, well, there are low-hanging fruits, just that they are slightly higher than in financial sector. So that still, as the Finnish example was, that some of the results you can deliver within a year if you pick those projects carefully. Also from the Denmark we heard. So that there has to be a way, at least I would conclude, how we can do this faster in Europe while maintaining this careful approach, which considers that evidence is what should drive, and this is how doctors learn to use those solutions. And well, the incentives will be there because the money will run out. So let's just hope that those machines will help a little bit, if not replace doctors, which I don't believe, then at least make them happier. So for happier doctors would be kind of my, and patients certainly as well. Janos, what did you get from the first half?
So probably it's getting late already and the bus is waiting. I wouldn't actually go into the first half now in depth, but instead I would like to thank all of you that are we staying now until the end, and I hope it was worth of your time. And I would like to thank all those people who were behind of this event and the whole week what we have been organizing. So especially if we do today, then Thomas is there, who was actually first drafting the whole concept. Thank you, Thomas. Maybe applause to Thomas. And also Lars, which has left already, but yeah, Lars was instrumental. But nevertheless, all the moderators, Ein, big applause. And Peter. And also Elizabeth, who has been our kind moderator yesterday, and this a very substantial contribution to this event. And tomorrow there will be also an important workshop in Tallinn. But I would like to thank also two ladies behind this whole week. Trine, which has been kindly organizing everything, and Keiu is somewhere. Okay. Okay, so, okay. And Elina. So, based on this feedback, or at least what we get as of now, I think we are now very seriously planning to have a repetition next year. If not repetition, I would not say repetition, but fourth Estonian Health Tech Week, and we have some ideas already to actually combine it with some other events or organizations. So we will let you know if you are interested, and certainly if you have any people in your network, you are free to share this information, of course. We do our best to convey the best practices, what we have here in Estonia, but also in the region. So thank you very much and stay in tune. And for those who attend tomorrow, yes, we're happy to meet again. But for those who will now travel back to home, so thank you and hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much.
I was told to tell some housekeeping matters. So the bus will leave in like 5 minutes. And there is also some lunch boxes that Keiu is preparing for you. So grab them on the way when you get to the bus. And those of you, the weather is very nice outside. So just enjoy also the Estonian late summer, and safe travels back home to everyone. I really enjoyed being with you. Thank you. Feedback here